Hello and welcome to Buy Africa, the show where we focus on investment opportunities around the continent. I'm Tapo Mudiba and thanks for joining me. Tonight, I'm joined by Ronak Gopaldis, Head of Country Risk at Rand Merchant Bank, for a closer look at the outlook for Zambia, especially as we head into elections on the 11th of August. Ronak, thank you for joining us. Zambia, let's before we delve into the actual details of the elections, where are we economically here?
Geez, a lot's happened in the past year and a half. The economy is not in great shape. Zambia, being a copper producer, has suffered, as have most commodity producers, by the massive decline in commodity prices that we've seen. We've seen copper reaching multi-year lows last year, and that's had a massive impact on the country, its foreign exchange earnings, its fiscal position. If you take a snapshot of where the economy is at the moment, inflation's north of 20%,
Right.
Fiscal deficits approaching 10%, growth is subdued, and they really have a lot of challenges ahead if we add in the power mix as well. So whichever government comes through after the election is going to have their hands full in order to try and remedy the economy and put it back on a much more sustainable footing.
Has the currency weakness done anything to alleviate the pressure?
So the currency weakness has really pushed through into the inflation numbers, like I said, north of 20%. So the Zambian consumer has really felt the brunt over the past year or so.
Right.
Forex reserves are pretty low. The Bank of Zambia has had to intervene with tight monetary policy, and that's obviously had an impact on growth.
Right.
So generally speaking, if you add the power situation into the mix, where we've had load shedding up to between 8 and 12 hours a day, it becomes very difficult for the economy to be productive and to grow. So the economic picture has been quite bleak for quite a while. And it's time that policymakers really focus their attention on putting the economy on a more sustainable footing.
Is there any positive spin from the geopolitics right now? What's the political landscape before elections?
So, I've been covering Zambia for quite a while, and this time, the political temperature is quite different to previous years.
Right.
I think we have a lot of new variables in play at the moment. So, for one, we've had a new electoral system. So instead of a first past the post system, we've moved to a 50+1 system where there's a potential for a runoff, and that's made the election much more competitive.
Right.
In addition to that, you've had political alliances and allegiances shifting rapidly. That's why you have situations like Rupia Banda, who was part of the opposition party that lost the last election and who subsequently was the victim of a witch hunt, now throwing his weight behind the PF government, who were sworn enemies in the past.
Yeah.
Guy Scott, who was from the Patriotic Front, the party that he helped found, has now switched his alliance and thrown his weight behind the opposition candidate.
Yeah.
So lots of musical chairs. It's quite soap opera-like. And I think it's made for interesting reading. In addition to that, you throw in the economic picture and you're set for a really high-stakes election. And investors are going to be watching that quite closely.
Is the economic picture causing this political uncertainty?
So funny enough, the economic picture hasn't really featured in political campaigns. It's almost seen as an inevitability that post-election the IMF will come through. The government will enter into a program with the IMF, but it's been largely absent from political campaigning. And I think that speaks to the nature of politics in Zambia, where rather than being about policy, about manifestos, about ideology, it's really personality driven.
Right.
And I see, I think that's really been shown in the campaign strategies. The Patriotic Front, which is the incumbent government, have really used a clever, quite genius strategy called the point strategy, or in Bemba it's called Sonta, pointing to the development that we've seen them deliver in the infrastructure space in rural areas.
Yeah.
By the same token, the UPND, the opposition, has also adopted quite an innovative strategy, the watermelon campaign, to prevent their supporters being intimidated by Patriotic Front supporters. So what that effectively entails is the fact that you can be green on the outside, which is the color of the Patriotic Front,
Right.
but red on the inside. And I think that really shows the political theater that's involved in Zambian politics.
Sure.
And it's made for quite compelling and interesting observations.
Right. So from an investment perspective, where are we? What does this mean? What's the likely policy should either party win?
So whether you're a domestic investor, whether you're a foreign investor, you want clarity around the elections.
Right.
And at the moment, there's a lot of uncertainty because it's a dead heat. Campaigning's at fever pitch. It really is anyone's race, and we have the very real possibility of a disputed elections. Now, what happens after that, and whether we go to a runoff or whether we go through the courts or through the streets, is going to be at the forefront of investor considerations.
Right.
I think as an investor, what you're looking for is you want a quick resolution to the election, and then you want snappy policy.
Right.
As I've mentioned, consensus seems to be that the IMF post-election will be coming into the country and helping the country with a program.
Yep.
That's been largely avoided for quite a while, given the conditionality that IMF programs generally entail. So I think that, and like I said, it's been largely absent from political campaigning because it is seen to be an inevitability.
If it is inevitable, does that provide some sort of clarity, given the restrictions from the IMF, of where Zambia will go from a policy perspective?
I think it would be useful to look at the Ghana example. So, Ghana had its election in 2012, and what we saw were three themes playing out there. We saw massive fiscal slippage, we saw currency weakness, and we saw high inflation.
Right.
Now, Zambia and Ghana have a lot of parallels, one in terms of their political systems, how close the elections are, but also in terms of the state that they find their economies at the moment. So what the IMF program did for Ghana was the IMF gave confidence to investors, it improved sentiment, and it acted as a nominal policy anchor.
Right.
And I think what you could see in Zambia is a lot of similarity coming to the fore. Now, execution and implementation and the conditionality of this program when it does come is going to be something that we'll watch closely and keenly. But I think generally, you'll have that short-term calming of markets, of sentiments, and at least some clarity and stability around the way things are done.
Right. Is there anything that the new government can do beyond pray for higher copper prices to turn around the economic picture for Zambia?
So there's a saying, never waste a good crisis, and I think that's typical for all commodity producers. And I think this should be a wake-up call to realize that undiversified economies are not sustainable.
Right. So
industrialization, far from being a luxury, is a necessity. And I think we're already seeing evidence of that if you look at Zambia's dependence on hydroelectric power. They now shift towards using solar power and diversifying those sources of power. The country has huge untapped agricultural potential. Tourism is also underdeveloped and undertapped.
Right.
So I think there's massive upside, but commodity prices recovering is again just going to make policymakers complacent. So I think we should use this opportunity, and governments across the continent, including Zambia, should use this opportunity to really accelerate diversification and reforms in order to improve their economies.
So in a perverse way, the current economic picture might actually be good for Zambia going forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think, we got seduced by this Africa rising narrative, high commodity prices, countries issuing Eurobonds at yields way lower than their counterparts in the developed world, rather.
Right.
You'll remember that Zambia's first Eurobond was issued at a yield lower than that of Spain's.
Yep.
And I think what the current crisis has offered an opportunity to pause, to reflect, to look at the quality of growth rather than simply the quantity of growth. And I think if policymakers can get a handle on that and understand that they need diverse sources of growth and much more better quality growth, then I think the crisis won't be wasted.
Now, tying it all together, what's the likelihood, and again, forecasting is difficult, that the incumbents from each political party will likely put in place programs that tick those boxes?
So I think the economy has largely taken a backseat to politics for quite a while in Zambia, and I think it's the big elephant in the room and something that you can't really ignore going forward. So I think regardless of what the government that assumes office post-election is going to be, the economy does become the urgent priority. If you look at the UPND and their leading candidate, Hakainde Hichilema, he's run a fix-it campaign. That's how he's marketed himself to the electorate, and he's had a 10-point manifesto. He's seen to be a technocrat, someone who business wants on board, and he's definitely someone who is seen to be a credible person from an economic policy perspective.
Right.
Now, the Patriotic Front, I think, have been excellent in terms of their campaign strategy, but they're largely seen to be better at campaigning than they are at governing. And I think, populist policies and populist campaigning is what we've seen in the run-up to this election as well.
Right.
But like I said, I think there's very little room to maneuver economically post-election. I think once we get a resolution to the election, the urgent attention does need to focus onto the economy, and I think both parties will eventually turn their attention to that.
So now for foreign investors, what's the picture? I'm assuming you have to wait until there's some sort of political certainty, but is Zambia high potential from an investment perspective, or should we be waiting even longer than just the elections?
So I think short term, you're right, political volatility is going to be the order of the day, and investors typically adopt a wait and see attitude in the run up to these elections. So once clarity comes to the fore and markets calm down, then I think people will reevaluate. I think over the long term, the country has immense potential. As I've mentioned, tourism, agriculture, mining, amongst other things. If the country does diversify towards manufacturing, services, there's huge untapped potential on that front.
Right.
The consumer base, infrastructure, power, opportunities are endless in the country, but I do think that, as is typically the case, we need this election to be done and dusted so that we can move forward in a positive direction.
Thanks to my guest, Ronak Gopaldus, Head of Country Risk at Rand Merchant Bank. That's all from Buy Africa this week. Remember to follow me on Twitter, that's @Mudiba_Tsepo, and send us your thoughts about the show using the hashtag BuyAfrica. For myself and the team, goodbye.